All through my life, I never really felt like my English name was mine. When I was adopted, my parents they named me after my mom, Catherine. And so we always shared a name, and I also went by a nickname. I went by my initials, KT. I still sometimes go by my initials, KT, but Catherine just never really suited me. It never felt like mine. And so, a few years ago, I decided to change my name back to Kyung, which always felt like it was mine. I am married to a wonderful man named Tim. He is a pastor here in Chicago, and we just get to enjoy the city together, enjoy our friends together. I really love cooking. I spend a lot of time cooking and thinking about new recipes to try. I have a couple of weekly rhythms where I cook with friends and we work on recipes together. I do some gardening as well, and so I really love to incorporate the things that I'm gardening into my food. I'm actually involved in an East Asian storytelling group in Chicago, and so it's a bunch of us that get together, we share meals with one another, and we share our personal stories, and we grapple with a lot of the connections and connected history between East Asian countries, and how a lot of our experiences are very interrelated with each other. But I think as a Korean adoptee, I'm consistently processing what it means to exist in a country that, I didn't come here by choice, and I've always felt somewhat like an outsider to my own family, looking and feeling very different from them. It's been a really incredible experience finding the storytelling community and finding friends who have similar experiences with me, even if they aren't adoptees. But I do think the adoption experience has really shaped my identity, because my sense of family and belonging is very different than some of my Asian peers. So I did go through my birth family search a little while ago, and I only have the information that's in my adoption papers. I don't have anything beyond that, but from what they say, my birth mother was a single mother, and she was not in a position to raise me. It sounds like her parents also died at a young age, and she was taking care of her siblings. And as an unwed mother, it was a best decision for us all that I be put up for adoption. I was then transferred from the sort of intake facility to foster care, where I was cared for by a woman. I have pictures of her in my adoption file. My understanding is that she had a couple of biological sons, and she also worked as a foster mother. And so she cared for me until 6 months before I was moved to America. They always would remark that I was a very mild-mannered baby. I didn't cry a ton. I guess apparently when I was on the plane from Korea to Los Angeles, they flew me to Los Angeles. I had earaches in both ears, and but didn't cry on the plane, and was just really mild-mannered. My parents remarked that I, was always kind of tired. I just would constantly be falling asleep, and was a very chill baby. From a very early age, I've always known that I was different. it was never a surprise that I was adopted. My parents were very forthcoming with that information, and even if they hadn't been, it would have been very apparent as soon as I would go to school that I was different. But I did grow up in a very white, affluent part of Southern California, and I just remember always kind of being aware of how different I was from my surroundings. And some of that has to do with my family, my adoptive family's makeup as well. Everything about our family kind of made us stick out from the norm, if you will. My parents are quite a bit older than my peers' parents, and my oldest brother was born with a pretty severe degenerative disease. And so for a lot of my life when he was alive, he was in a wheelchair and he couldn't talk and couldn't walk. And then I also had a younger brother who was significantly younger than me. And so, you know, my parents later in life would remark that they often felt uncomfortable as well navigating our surroundings. They would get comments that, you know, they must be foster parents just because our family looked very non-traditional, with a really young son, an older one in a wheelchair, and then me. But I think that sense of always kind of sticking out in one's surroundings was really impressionable for me as a young age. I was very aware at school. You know, my school was very white. I realized that, you know, I didn't look like any of my peers, and they had a lot of questions for me at a young age. And so I just remember feeling uncomfortable, consistently uncomfortable. I do remember a couple of occurrences where, you know, there was one time where a childhood friend growing up, I asked her to come over to my house for a play date, and she remarked that she had never been to an Asian family's household before. And I remember not really being able to articulate some of the intricacies of that, because technically it is an Asian household with me in it, but not in the ways that she probably perceived that, since my parents are not Asian. But I think that that's probably my first memory of a sort of racial consciousness that we are different, and I didn't quite know what that even meant, or the implications of a comment like that. My school was also just very homogenous, very white. Looking back now, I remember there was one kid in my class who is Indian American, and they always sat us next to each other. And I think typically the seating chart was alphabetical, and our names were not next to each other's in the alphabet, but they would always sit us next to each other. So I have a lot of memories of grade school growing up with him. And so sometimes I'm curious about what that was. But I also do have a lot of memories, whatever processing looks like when you're, you know, 5, 6, 7, with my friend who also didn't look like anyone else from our class. I must have been 4 or 5 or so. My parents have always, for as long as I can remember, my parents have always told me that I was adopted, which has come with a lot of mixed feelings. I think if I'm being most charitable to my parents, I think that they were telling me, reminding me that, you know, every time they would tell me that I was adopted, they would remark that they chose me and that they were my real family and they were my parents. And I think charitably, I think they were trying to remind me that, you know, I do have family and I do have a place to belong, and yeah, just kind of affirming that. But I'm not sure if, my first memories of them telling me those things, I always got this sense of suspicion. It always felt more like they were saying that to affirm themselves. I've always been curious about my origins. I've always been curious about my birth family. And whenever they would tell me those things, we are your real family, it would make me feel guilty about having curiosities about where I came from. And so I think when they would say that, it almost felt like they were saying it for themselves, to remind themselves of their place in my life. I'm not sure if I really caught on until much later in life that they were maybe trying to remind me that any notions of abandonment or rejection were things that they were trying to counteract. But in many ways, I don't have feelings of abandonment or rejection from my birth family. I actually feel a lot of those feelings toward my adoptive family because of the ways that they've treated me in certain circumstances and not been able to see me in a lot of ways. I have a very complicated relationship with my parents. I currently don't have a relationship with them. And that ultimately has been the best decision for me because I do love them a lot and I respect them a lot, and distance from them has allowed me to maintain that love and respect of them. My parents are very hardworking. They have faced a lot of challenges in life and are very hardworking, very honest people, and they really, believe in being good and true of character, and they really instilled that in me. I always grew up with a sense of pride in my work and work ethic, and I really respect the way that they raised me in many ways because they got me to be where I am today in many ways. But unfortunately, there are a lot of gaps in where we can exist as family. In talking about how growing up I consistently felt exposed and sort of vulnerable in sticking out. They don't have much awareness for that, and even today they will say things and do things that are really unsensitive and inappropriate at times. That growing up, they would maybe say something racially inappropriate about an Asian family they would see out, and that just made me really confused as a child, wondering why they would say something about someone who looked like me. And growing up and learning more about myself and growing in my own consciousness of these things, realizing that I think those will always be gaps in our ways of relating to one another, that there will always be aspects of myself that they can't see or choose not to see. And that leaves me feeling very uncared for, really vulnerable to my parents. And so not having a relationship and keeping some distance from them has been a way to keep myself safe and my family safe while also retaining the love and respect that I have for them. Because I was raised in such a nuclear family in a part of the world that really glorifies the sort of nuclear family and what that looks like. I very much had a vision for that for myself as well, that I don't think I really started to challenge and piece apart until much later in life, until after college. I always kind of felt like that was, what you should strive for, even with its issues and problems that I experienced growing up. I think, I'm married now, and so I have this sort of nuclear family, but my vision for family has changed a lot. A lot of my close friends and the people that I keep close to me, I consider family, and, thinking less about the sort of nuclear structure of a family and more about relationships. That the relationships are what build closeness, intimacy, care, and kind of thinking beyond the structure of a typical father, mother, children structure, and thinking more about community and what relationship building and community building can look like as a form of family. So I did go through the adoption agency that I was adopted through and did a birth family search, and through that process, it was the first time I was ever able to see my adoption papers. My parents never showed them to me, the American version that they have, so I got to see all of my papers. And through the search, the adoption agency contacted the last known contact information that they had on file, and they did let me know that they were able to make contact with my birth mother, but that she decided not to reciprocate contact. And so, that was a difficult time to, for the first time, have this sort of confirmation that she was, in fact, a real person. Up until that point, in a lot of ways, she's kind of seemed like this mythical figure in my life. And she was a real person and with real choices. And I honor her choice. I have no idea how difficult it must have been for her. And so I understand not wanting to, maybe finding it too difficult to be open to that part of one's life and history. So I honor her choice, and I'm grateful to know that she is alive and have the information that I do have. But it's also difficult to grieve the loss of relationship, knowing that I'll never get to know anything more than that. For many reasons, I was not ready. I didn't always feel like doing a birth family search was allowed. It felt like it would be a betrayal to my adoptive family. I think that they would have been supportive, but it would have been difficult too. And so it just felt like, and it wasn't the right time, that it would just bring up additional difficulty that I didn't want to welcome at the time. But during the pandemic, I had a lot of time to think and to work through things for myself. And, there were a couple of catalysts that finally got me to a place where I felt like I was ready. I had the friends and family around me that felt like strong support, who could really walk with me through that process. And my husband's dad was just like, you should just do it, just, it was just such a simple remark of, you should just do it. And I think the simplicity of when he said that was just like, yeah, I should just start. I can always stop the process if it becomes too much. But at this point, I think I kind of recognized that the longer that I would wait, the less answers that I would have, and that I just needed to start at some point and start somewhere. On a more relational level, I think there are a lot of gaps in understanding around the Korean adoptee experience, and there are, narratives of what it means to be a Korean adoptee that are heavily spoken in America, and those narratives are very different than in Korea. I know this has never been my experience, but I know that some adoptees have had a hard time going back to Korea because they're looked down on and maybe treated differently. And so, in some ways I'd love to see more centering of Korean adoptee stories and have those narratives kind of challenge the dominant ones that we often hear, especially since all of our stories are so different. There are certainly trends and through lines, but our stories are all so varied and complicated, and I would love to see more centering of our stories. I think things like citizenship really complicate that as well, because not all Korean adoptees have citizenship in the country that they were adopted to. Some more advocacy around that, so that people feel safe and secure wherever they feel like home is to them. I also know that mental health is a huge thing that I've struggled with, and is something that is a large struggle within the adoptive community. Adoptees are at higher risk of suicide, and I don't think that people understand the emotional and mental toll of grappling with these really difficult challenges and aspects of life, belonging, family, at a really young age, what that toll has on someone. Resources, understanding that those are needed, because adoption can be a really traumatic experience, and I don't know if it's always seen that way or understood it that way. I just feel incredibly grateful for this opportunity. I think it's important for our stories to be captured, for that history to be captured, because a lot of the dominant narratives around adoption are dominant because our stories aren't always captured, and they aren't always seen as important parts and artifacts of history. And so, I feel grateful to share my story. I hope that people feel emboldened to share their story as well. It's important. It has been important for me to hear other people's stories, to know that I'm not alone, that there is community, that there is belonging, and that the experiences that we've had growing up that have very much formed and shaped us are not the only parts of our lives that get to form and shape us.